Wreckage and shattered memories. The Admiral's hands trembled, not from fear that had come and gone, burned away like the bridge he now stood upon. What remained was something colder, hollower, a silence so profound that even the hum of failing systems could not fill it. His once pristine silver uniform was stained black with soot, streaked dark with the dried blood of his crew. His warriors, his brothers and sisters in arms, the millions he had led, the legions that had once spread terror across 5 galaxies, gone. Admiral Vrthek, whose name had once made entire star systems bow or burn, now stood before a fractured view screen. The vastness beyond no longer displayed stars, no longer held the grand order of the Empire's fleets. It was a graveyard. Debris drifted like frozen corpses, shattered cruisers, split battleships, dismembered flagships. Fire still gnawed at the carcasses of ships that once could have swallowed cities whole. Blinking slowly, Vrthek watched a single vessel drift through the wreckage. Small, ugly, brutally crude, and unmistakably human. Its hull was scorched, its engines coughing life in ragged spurts. Yet somehow it remained untouched, weaving through the ruins like a specter. "Pull up the last combat feed," he rasped, his voice raw hollow. A deck officer, one of the few left, breathing, hesitated. His scales had paled to a sickly gray and his uniform hung loose on his frame. "Sir, you don't want to see it again." "I need to," Vrthek said. His voice, though broken, left no room for argument. The officer flinched, but obeyed. With a trembling claw, he activated the terminal. The screen flickered to life, a ghost replaying the moment of their annihilation. It had started predictably enough. The human fleet had arrived, barely 1,000 ships. Many no bigger than shuttles, most unremarkable to the trained eye. A laughable force against them. Vrthek had deployed the Gorinthi Armada, over 100,000 warships, sleek engineered to perfection, battle-proven through centuries of conquest. Protocol dictated that they wait for provocation, and so they had. The humans fired first. Their weapons weren't stronger. Their shields weren't better. But the chaos they wrought was like nothing the Gorinthi had ever faced. They struck, not at the heart, but at the nerves, the communications nodes, the life support cores, the AI relay hubs. Their ships moved erratically, splitting and reforming like packs of predators. One human frigate had flung itself directly into a reactor cluster, annihilating 7 Gorinthi cruisers in the explosion. There was no formation, no coordination as the Ginthi understood it, only madness. "Pause," Vrthek croaked. The feed froze on the screen. The human commander stared back at them. Blood streamed from a gash across his forehead, but his mouth, his cursed mouth, was grinning. Behind him, his command crew lay slumped lifeless. Some had served through a dozen campaigns, across frozen moons and burning worlds. Veterans, legends gone. The commander smiled as his ship burned around him. What kind of creature smiles while dying? No one answered. Vrthek's jaw tightened until it creaked. "We should have crushed them," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "We had numbers, we had technology, we had everything." The deck officer behind him swallowed audibly. We underestimated them, sir." "Underestimated," Vrthek repeated, tasting the word like acid. It wasn't an excuse. It wasn't even a mistake. It was an epitaph. This wasn't a loss. It was a dismantling mind, body, and soul. They hadn't merely been beaten. They had been broken. A soft ping broke the heavy silence. An incoming transmission. Human frequency. Open channel. "Arrogant bastards." Vrthek glanced at the officer. "Put it through," he said grimly. The screen flickered again. The face that appeared was not what he expected. A woman, human perhaps, mid-40s, her hair streaked with gray, her uniform torn and scorched. She looked into the camera with eyes like winter cold inevitable. "This is Commander Elena Hayes of Earth's 7th Resistance Fleet," she said. Her voice was calm, almost tired. "To what remains of the Gorinthi Armada, this is mercy." Vrthek couldn't speak. He couldn't even breathe. "We warned you," she continued, leaning closer, her voice like a blade. "We told you not to enslave our colonies, not to experiment on our civilians, not to burn our cities." The transmission cut to black, and still the silence rang louder than any explosion. In the depths of his bones, Admiral Vrthek realized something the Ginthi had never even considered possible. Humanity wasn't fighting to win. They were fighting because there was nothing left to lose, and that made them invincible. A verdict through the screen. The ruined command deck smelled of burning insulation and melted metal. Somewhere in the vents, a dying fire crackled, coughing black smoke into the air. Admiral Vrthek stood frozen before the blank view screen, the echo of Elena Hayes' words still reverberating in the hollow space behind his ribs. "This is mercy. Mercy. The Gorinthi Armada. The pride of 5 galaxies reduced to floating corpses and twisted wreckage, and the humans called it mercy. The console pinged again. Another transmission request. No encryption, no demands, just the open hand of another blow. Patch it through, Vrithek ordered, his voice little more than a growl. The screen shimmered back to life, Commander Elena Hayes once more. This time she wasn't speaking to him. She spoke to the entire surviving fleet, and she spoke as though she already knew what they would become. Ghosts, relics, broken memories, drifting through the dark. Her face was bruised, her uniform torn at the shoulder, but her eyes, those unblinking human eyes, were clear. Cold, unafraid. "You should have listened," she said. "You should have known better." Behind her, faint echoes of battle flickered on broken monitors. A ship's bridge gutted by fire. The forms of fallen crew slumped in silence. Hayes leaned closer. Her voice dropped into something even more lethal than rage. Something worse. Certainty. "You thought we would break. You thought pain would end us. You thought wrong." Vrithek felt something shift in the room. A pressure, a terrible weight. Around him, the surviving officers lowered their heads, unable to meet the human's gaze, even through a screen. "You took our homes," Hayes said. "You experimented on our children. You burned our cities to ash." She pulled something from her jacket. A battered, scorched photograph. She held it up to the camera, a young girl smiling under a clear blue sky. A face full of dreams, now forever gone. "Her name was Talia Hayes," Elena said, and for the first time her voice cracked, not from weakness but from something deeper. An ache so profound it had become the fuel of her existence. "She was my niece." Vrithek staggered back a half step as if struck. He knew the name Ballora 9, the harvesting protocols, a classified project, efficient, ruthless. She lowered the photograph slowly, her hand trembling once, then going still. "You turned her into a science experiment." Hayes said. "You tore her apart piece by piece." The silence on the deck grew unbearable. Even the consoles seemed to hold their breath. "And now," she said, "you will understand what you created." The screen went black again. For a moment, there was only the hiss of dying systems and the slow groaning of twisted metal around them. Then a whisper, a broken, shaking whisper from one of the junior officers. "They're monsters." "No," Vrithek said, surprising even himself with the steadiness of his voice. "There's something worse." He turned away from the dead screen. He could no longer bear to look at it. "They are desperate," he said, "and desperate creatures do not fear death. They become it." The officer who had spoken choked on his breath, recoiling as if from a physical blow. A low tremor shook the deck. Somewhere deep in the ship's wounded gut, the reactors were failing. The artificial gravity faltered, causing the wreckage to list slightly to starboard. "Admiral," said Brax, his second-in-command voice hoarse from smoke and grief. "We have to abandon ship." "To what?" Vrithek muttered. "There's nothing left. Some escape pods are operational. A cruiser limping nearby. We might make it." He stared at the floor for a long moment, at the bloodstains, in the wreckage, the shattered dreams of an empire that had once thought itself immortal. Finally, he nodded slowly, heavily. "Prepare for evacuation," he said. They stumbled down ruined corridors, past the bodies of officers and soldiers alike. No one saluted. No one even looked up. The proud Garithi now shuffled like shades of the dead, their steps haunted by something far heavier than defeat. Shame. At the hangar bay, chaos reigned. Medics dragged the wounded technicians, screamed into malfunctioning panels. Escape pods launched one after another, desperate, frantic. There were not enough for everyone. There never were. Vrithek reached the last functional pod just as a crackling voice erupted from the intercoms. It was her again, Elena Hayes. Her voice filled the hangar with a terrible, calm finality. "Admiral Vrithek," she said, "before you flee like the coward you are, I want to tell you a story." The hangar went still. Even the wounded seemed to pause, straining to hear. Hayes' voice was low, personal, lethal. She was 17, she said. "Talia, she lived on Ballora 9 when your harvesters came. She wasn't a soldier. She was just a student. You stole her future. You tore her apart for your science." Vrithek closed his eyes, feeling the words strike deeper than any weapon. He had signed the order. He had called it necessary. Strategic, efficient. "You could have fought clean," Hayes said, "but you made it personal." A final pause. A silence filled with all the rage and sorrow the human soul could carry. "So did we." The message cut out. No demands, no ultimatums, only judgment. Only the promise that there would be no forgiveness. Vrithek climbed into the pod. As the door hissed shut and the launch sequence engaged, he looked back one last time at the burning skeleton of his command ship. The shame stayed with him stitched into every breath he took. Humanity had not simply defeated the Gorinthes. They had taught them fear. The cracks within the Empire. The escape pod rocked violently as it latched onto the crippled cruiser, its systems whining in protest. Admiral Vrthek barely noticed. He sat hunched inside the cramped pod arms locked around his knees, staring at nothing. His mind remained trapped in the smoldering ruins he had left behind. The cruiser was a ghost ship in every sense. Its quarters were dim-lit only by flickering emergency lights. Makeshift triage centers lined the walls where medics worked frantically amid the stench of blood and burned flesh. Soldiers, missing limbs, missing eyes, missing hope. None saluted as the Admiral passed. None even spoke. They looked through him as if he were just another casualty. He stumbled into what remained of the command center. Two officers stood there, young, battered, their uniforms torn and scorched. They straightened stiffly when he entered. But it was a reflex, not respect. Fear, perhaps, or duty clinging to its last breath. "High Command demands a report," croaked the younger one, Kelzer. If Vrthek remembered correctly, his voice trembled slightly but held a thin veneer of defiance. Vrthek stared at him for a long, heavy moment. Then, with a voice scraped raw by smoke and failure, he muttered, "Tell them it was a tactical anomaly. Tell them the humans employed suicidal tactics and exploited unforeseen weaknesses." Kelzar blinked, his face pale beneath his scaled skin. "Sir," he said carefully, "with respect, no one is going to believe that." Vrthek's head snapped up sharply. His old instincts flared, but only briefly. "Are you questioning my word, Lieutenant?" he growled. "I'm questioning reality." Kelzar snapped back, surprising even himself. "We faced ships half our size, outnumbered them 100 to 1, and we didn't just lose a battle, we lost a war in a single night." Silence. The second officer, barely more than a cadet, whispered, "They knew us, sir. They knew how we think, how we fight. They targeted our AI relays before we even launched missiles. They jammed our targeting systems using their own wreckage. They used their own dead as shields. They're not soldiers," Kelzar said quietly. "They're monsters." "No," Vrthek corrected, his voice low grave. "There's something worse. They're desperate." The room fell into an uneasy, shuddering silence. Then the cruiser's communication system beeped an unsecured transmission. "Human frequency?" Again. The officers froze, no one moved. "Play it," Vrthek ordered, though his stomach clenched as he spoke. The screen flickered to life, and there she was, Commander Elena Hayes. This time she appeared in a stark, dimly lit room. No battle raging behind her. No smoke, no blood. Just her steady, unblinking gaze. She spoke as if addressing not just the survivors of the Gorinthi fleet, but every soul left in their battered empire. "This message," she said, "is for all surviving Gorinthi forces. We know you're retreating, we know you're bleeding, and we know your leaders won't admit it, but you lost." She leaned closer, her voice sharpening like a blade. "You're not the first empire to try and crush us, but ask yourselves how many of them still exist." No one answered, no one dared. "Humanity is not special because we're strong," Hayes continued, her voice lowering. "We're special because we adapt. Every time we're broken, we come back sharper, meaner, hungrier." Then her voice turned cold enough to frost glass. "And now you've made us very, very hungry." The screen cut to black. The silence left behind was like a weight pressing down on the room, heavier than gravity. Vrthek stood slowly. His joints ached with more than just the wounds of battle. "She's not sending these messages to gloat," he said. "Not to boast. She's trying to rewrite what fear means." Kelzar swallowed hard. "Sir, what do we do?" For the first time in his long, decorated career, Vrthek didn't know. He had been trained to defeat armies, to crush uprisings, to conquer worlds. But he had never been trained to fight ghosts. He had never been trained to survive shame. They weren't just facing soldiers anymore. They were facing an idea. A nightmare given flesh and fury. The deck shook again, another explosion, distant but ominous. The structural integrity of the cruiser would not hold forever. Kelzar glanced nervously at his console. "Sir, should we request reinforcements?" Vrthek stared at the darkened screen where Hayes had just spoken. What good were reinforcements when morale was already broken? When even his officers no longer believed in their invincibility? When whispers of fear seeped like blood through every corridor, every mind? "No," he said at last. His voice was a gravestone. "We return to Tharzul Prime, deliver the report. Let the High Command decide if they still want to throw more fleets into a fire they cannot extinguish. And if they do, Kelzer asked. Vrethek turned his shadow long and broken against the flickering lights. Then they'll do so knowing the truth, he said, that we're not fighting savages. He paused at the doorway. Looking back once more at the two stunned officers. We're fighting students of war, fast learners, creatures willing to burn themselves just to scar us. And with that, he left the bridge, his steps heavy as chains dragging across the scorched floor. Behind him, the embers of the Gorinthi Armada continued to drift silently through the void, a grave marker for the end of an age and the birth of something far more terrifying. The night Tharzal burned. Tharzal Prime had never known fear. It was a world built to intimidate, massive obsidian towers stabbing into a sky permanently choked with industrial smoke, a planet that wore its power like a crown of iron. But tonight, for the first time in generations, Tharzal Prime shook. Above the darkened skyline, fires streaked across the atmosphere, burning wreckage decoys and the dying pieces of a once mighty fleet. Sirens wailed across the city as planetary defenses roared to life, targeting phantom signals and ghost images. Anti-air batteries spun wildly, unloading their payloads into empty skies. Panic radiated through every sector. On the bridge of a stolen Gorinthi destroyer cloaked in the chaos, Commander Elena Hayes stood rigid, her gaze locked on the screens displaying the unfolding bedlam below. Drop the decoys, she ordered, voice sharp and cold. Ava Lennox, sitting at the tactical station, nodded without hesitation. Full spread launched, 30 sectors targeted. False signals in the upper atmosphere deployed. Good, Hayes muttered, her hands curling into fists at her sides. Let them chase ghosts. The Resistance strike force was riding the wave of madness they had created, small, invisible amidst the flood of chaos. Their real ships slipped through the defenses unseen, aimed straight at the heart of the Gorinthi Empire. The High Command Citadel. 10 fighters, that was all. 10 human souls burdened with a mission to end an empire. The gravelift hummed as it descended into the Citadel's underbelly, shuddering occasionally as shockwaves from the surface bombardments rocked the ancient structures. You think he'll be there? Milo whispered, checking his rifle's charge again. Hayes didn't look at him. Her voice was steel. Yes, Vrethek won't run. The gravelift doors hissed open, revealing a city transformed into a war zone. Smoke curled through shattered streets. Civilians screamed, some fleeing, others frozen in place. Gorinthi soldiers fired blindly into the chaos, their formations collapsing under the weight of confusion and fear. Holograms flickered and died, their perfect images of the Empire's strength, replaced by hacked broadcasts, the faces of human survivors. Elena Hayes' voice playing on loop. You once said humans fought like insects. Then why are your towers falling? They moved swiftly, cutting through stunned enemy squads with brutal efficiency. Milo took a shot to the shoulder but pushed on. Ava blasted through a barricade without slowing. Every inch closer to the command chamber felt like tearing open a wound the Empire had hidden beneath its gilded skin. They reached the blast doors of the inner sanctum. Hayes raised her rifle, and with a nod from Ava, kicked the doors open. Inside, Admiral Vrethek stood alone, silhouetted against the flickering light of collapsing systems. He turned slowly, a pulse rifle hanging loosely in his hand. So this is how it ends, he said, voice devoid of fear, but heavy with something else. Resignation. No, Hayes said, stepping into the room, her weapon trained on him. It ended the day you tortured our children. This, she gestured around at the burning skyline. The broken towers, the smoking heavens is just the closing act. Vrethek's eyes, dark and tired, studied her. For a moment, there was almost something like understanding between them. Warriors, both survivors of their own destruction. I warned them. He said, I told them what you would become. You didn't understand, Hayes replied coldly. You told them what we were. You never understood what you made us. The smoke billowed around them, curling like grasping fingers. The battle outside raged on a symphony of collapse. I won't beg, Vrethek said simply. I don't want you to, Hayes answered. She pulled the trigger. The shot caught Vrethek square in the chest, lifting him off his feet. He crashed against the command console, sparks showering the floor, then crumpled without ceremony. For a moment, no one moved. Then Hayes exhaled a long, shuddering breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She lowered her rifle and stepped forward, staring down at the fallen admiral. Not with hatred, not even with satisfaction, but with the grim relief of a surgeon excising a cancer. Ava and Milo approached carefully. That's it then, Milo said, his voice hushed, awed. We did it. Hayes shook her head slowly. No, we just made it possible. Outside, Tharzal Prime burned. The night sky was streaked with fire and smoke, the once unassailable fortress of the Gorinthi now a smoldering graveyard. "You think they'll surrender?" Ava asked, standing beside her. Hayes stared out across the devastation, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, they'll adapt if they're smart, or they'll burn." She slung her rifle over her shoulder and turned back into the smoke-filled hallway. "Either way," she said, "we're not done." 6 months later, the galaxy was quiet. Not peaceful. Never that, but quiet. The kind of silence that follows a scream when everyone is too afraid to speak, too shocked to move. The Gorinthi Empire was broken. What remained were scattered warlords, isolated governors clinging to scraps of authority, and terrified generals hiding in underground bunkers, pretending they still ruled something. Most colonies had either declared independence or thrown open their gates to the resistance, white flags fluttering under blackened skies. Earth-scarred, battered Earth had become something it hadn't been in centuries. A symbol, a warning, a fire in the dark. Commander Elena Hayes sat alone on a ridge overlooking what had once been a Gorinthi military base, now converted into a memorial. Rows of makeshift gravestones stretched out before her, crude metal plaques etched with names. Some real, some guessed, many without bodies to bury. She knelt before one Talia Hayes, age 17. "They're taking us apart piece by piece." The wind stirred, carrying the scent of fresh soil and old ash. Hayes ran her fingers across the plaque, tracing the name, the final whisper of a life stolen. Behind her, footsteps crunched on the gravel. Ava Lennox approached, sitting down beside her without a word. They watched the wind ripple across the fields of the dead. "Think they'll retaliate?" Ava asked eventually, voice low. Hayes shrugged. Maybe not. Fear does strange things." Silence stretched between them. "You know," Ava said, "you could run for the new council. People would follow you. You're a hero." Hayes laughed, but it was a sound devoid of humor. "I didn't fight to become a leader," she said. "I fought so no one else would have to become me." Ava didn't push. She understood they all did. They had not won glory. They had not found salvation. They had simply survived, and sometimes that had to be enough. After the storm. The days after the fall of Tharzal Prime stretched into weeks, then months, blurring into a haze of rubble reconstruction and cautious silence. The resistance once, a desperate patchwork of survivors, was now something far more dangerous, a movement with momentum. Across the galaxy, former Gorinthi colonies broke away, raising banners of independence or pledging allegiance to Earth-led provisional governments. Governors who once commanded millions now cowered in underground bunkers, issuing frantic, ignored decrees to systems that no longer listened. The Gorinthi Empire wasn't dead. Not yet, but it was dying, and it knew it. Commander Elena Hayes remained an enduring symbol through it all. She did not ask for statues, she did not want ceremonies. Yet her name became a whispered legend in refugee camps, resistance bases, and even the scattered remnants of Gorinthi forces. They had not merely won a war, they had shattered an idea, but Hayes felt no triumph, only a hollowness that refused to be filled. She stood now atop a broken tower overlooking a liberated world once known as Veltron 3. Once it had been a thriving Gorinthi metropolis, a jewel of the Empire's colonial ambition. Now it was a scarred ruin dotted with rough human settlements and skeletal remains of what had been. The wind stirred the ashes at her feet. Below, makeshift communities were rebuilding humans. Former Gorinthi slaves, even defected aliens who had fled the Empire's collapse. Children played in fields of blackened earth, their laughter thin and strange against the backdrop of toppled towers. The cost of victory was written into the soil itself. Behind her, Lieutenant Milo Sandin approached holding a battered datapad. His youthful face was no longer fresh. Too many battles had etched new lines into it, hardened his gaze. "Council elections are scheduled," he reported. 2 months from now, Earth's been officially nominated as the center of the new Galactic Assembly. Hayes gave a small grunt. "Guess burning down an empire makes you popular." Milo smiled wryly. "They're already planning monuments." "Let them," Hayes muttered. "Let them build statues and recite speeches. Just make sure their ships point away from us." Milo hesitated, then handed her the datapad. "There's something else. A transmission came through last night. Encrypted. Former Gorinthi officer wants to talk. Says he remembers what you said before the final strike. Says maybe it's time to learn instead of conquer." Hayes stared at the datapad for a long moment, the cool metal heavy in her palm. She didn't open the message. "Not yet." Later, she said, handing it back, "Right now, the galaxy doesn't need more speeches. It needs time to heal, to remember." She turned back to the view, watching a group of children kick a worn leather ball across the cracked remains of a Gorinthi plaza. Their laughter, bright and careless, floated up to her like a promise. Behind her, Milo saluted and withdrew without another word. He knew better than to disturb her when she stood in places like this, surrounded by ghosts. Hayes knelt, slowly placing a small crude token at the base of the ruined tower, a shard of metal etched with the name Talia Hayes. No grand monument, no soaring anthem, just a sister's grief carved into a broken world. "You made me a monster," she whispered to the wind. "But I chose what kind of monster I'd be." The words vanished into the ash-choked breeze, unheard by any but the dead. Later that night, around a communal fire at the heart of the newly forming settlement, Hayes sat among her people. Not soldiers, not rebels, people survivors, forging something new from the ruins. Ava Lennox passed around ration packs, sitting beside her with a heavy sigh. "You think they'll come back someday?" Ava asked, tearing open a package of stale protein bars. Hayes poked the fire with a stick, watching the embers leap and fall. "Different name, different flag, same arrogance," she said finally. Ava smiled grimly. "Then we make sure the next generation knows how to deal with them." Hayes nodded. "Not with speeches, not with monuments, with stories. Truth. So they remember what happens when you forget that freedom is paid for in blood." The fire crackled between them, casting long shadows across the ragged circle of survivors. Miners, farmers, ex-soldiers, orphans. Hayes looked around the gathering. No uniforms, no ranks. Just humanity, raw and bruised but alive. "We're not done," she said softly. Ava leaned back, staring up at the stars scattered across the smoke-streaked sky. "No," she agreed. "We're just getting started." And somewhere far beyond the ruins of Veltron 3, beyond the dying embers of a shattered empire, the seeds of something new began to take root. Not an empire, not a rebellion, something harder to define, something stronger. Hope. The new seeds. Beneath the scorched remnants of Tharzul Prime and the shadows of crumbling spires and shattered statues, the last embers of the old world struggled to cling to life. But already something new was stirring. In hidden places, resistance cells and liberated colonies sent quiet signals to one another. Scientists, teachers, healers. Those who had survived the long darkness gathered in secret councils, dreaming not of conquest but of rebuilding. And Earth, the battered cradle of humanity, stood at the center of it all. Not as a conqueror, not as a tyrant, but as a scarred reminder of what it cost to be free. Commander Elena Hayes walked slowly through the halls of the newly established assembly outpost, located atop what had once been a Gorinthi command center. The structure was barely holding together. Cracked walls, flickering lights, exposed wiring. But it stood, and for now, that was enough. She paused outside a small conference room. Through the grimy window, she could see diplomats arguing, engineers trading blueprints, farmers discussing seed distribution across the liberated worlds. None of them wore uniforms. None of them carried weapons. It was messy, chaotic human. A faint smile touched her lips before she turned away. In her hand, she carried a data pad, the message Milo had given her days ago. She hadn't read it then. She hadn't been ready. But now she tapped it open. The transmission was short. A former Gorinthi officer, once part of the High Command, now claiming no loyalty to any surviving faction. His message was simple. "We have seen what we became. We are ready to learn." No promises. No apologies, just an opening. A crack in the armor. Hayes closed the data pad and slipped it into her jacket. She didn't know what the future would bring. She didn't trust easily. Trust was a luxury burned out of her long ago. But perhaps, just perhaps, there was room for something better. Outside, beyond the battered assembly walls, life moved on. Children of all species played in the courtyards. Humans freed alien slaves, even a few young Gorinthi. They shared food stories, laughter. They didn't yet understand the weight of history hanging above them. And maybe Hayes thought that was a good thing. They didn't need to inherit the bitterness of their parents. They needed to inherit something stronger. Memory, resilience, hope. She walked past a small memorial garden being planted along the ruins of an old parade ground. Volunteers knelt in the dirt, burying seeds in soil still dark with ash. Tiny green sprouts pushed stubbornly through the blackened earth, life insisting on itself. At the edge of the garden, Milo was working his sleeves rolled up, dirt smeared across his face. He spotted her and grinned, waving her over. Hayes knelt beside him without a word, taking a seed packet from the crate and pressing her fingers into the soil. "You think it'll grow?" Milo asked, wiping sweat from his brow. Hayes glanced up at the wreckage around them. The broken walls, the twisted beams, the scars of an empire's fall. "Maybe not today," she said, "maybe not tomorrow." She pressed the seed deeper into the ground, covering it gently. "But someday?" Milo nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. Beside them, a small plaque had been set into the ground. No grand dedication, just a few words. In memory of what was lost, in hope for what will come. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long golden rays across the ruined world, Hayes stood and brushed the dirt from her hands. The stars blinked into view, one by one silent witnesses to everything that had been and everything still to come. Milo joined her, standing quietly. Behind them, others finished their planting, their laughter and quiet conversations filling the air with something precious and fragile. Not victory songs, not war chants, life. Hayes closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the mingled sense of ash, earth, and new growth. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the worst was behind them. And whatever battles still lay ahead, they would not face them alone. Because they had learned the hardest, most painful lesson of all, that survival wasn't enough. To truly live, to truly matter, they had to build. They had to remember. They had to hope. Hayes opened her eyes, feeling the weight of the past settle more lightly on her shoulders. It would never be easy. Nothing worth having ever was. But for the first time, the future wasn't just something to survive. It was something to fight for. And this time they would fight not out of rage, not out of vengeance, but out of love for what they were building. A new world, a new beginning. The seeds were planted. The galaxy would never be the same again.